Quiet neighborhoods sell a promise. Clean sidewalks, trimmed hedges, porch lights that come on at the same time every night. They look like safety made visible. People buy into that look because it feels controlled, predictable, almost curated. Nothing bad could happen here, they tell themselves, because bad things belong somewhere else. Somewhere louder. Somewhere messier. Somewhere without rules posted on a bulletin board. That belief is comforting, but it's also dangerous. Silence doesn't mean peace. It often just means nobody is talking. In places where everything looks perfect, problems learn how to hide better. They slip behind closed doors, parked cars, friendly smiles, and HOA newsletters full of reminders about trash bins and lawn height. The quieter the place, the easier it is to assume nothing needs attention. People in these neighborhoods learn an unspoken rule early on. Don't rock the boat. Don't make a scene. Don't be the person everyone whispers about at the next meeting. When something feels off, it's easier to explain it away than to challenge the image everyone else is invested in protecting. Maybe it was a misunderstanding. Maybe it's none of my business. Maybe someone else will handle it. That mindset creates blind spots. Predatory behavior thrives where people assume safety instead of paying attention. It feeds on politeness and hesitation, on the fear of being wrong or embarrassing yourself, on the idea that danger always announces itself loudly, instead of showing up quietly and confidently, counting on nobody wanting to get involved. In a quiet neighborhood, the absence of noise becomes cover. Raised voices would draw attention, so threats come low and close. Struggles happen out of sight. The environment itself works in favor of anyone who knows how to exploit it. Neighbors are close enough to hear something, but far enough apart to convince themselves it's not what they think it is. Curtains stay closed. Doors stay locked. Everyone stays in their lane. There's also a false sense of familiarity. People assume that because they've seen someone wave, grill on weekends, or walk a dog, they know who that person is. Familiar faces get a pass. They're less likely to be questioned, less likely to be reported. Trust is handed out based on routine instead of behavior, and that trust can be used as camouflage. Rules and structures meant to maintain order can sometimes reinforce silence. HOAs focus on appearances, not actions. They enforce what's visible and measurable. Grass length, paint color, parking violations. The serious stuff doesn't fit neatly into a checklist, so it gets ignored or pushed aside. When image matters more than accountability, problems don't disappear. They just sink lower. Victims in these environments often feel trapped by the same calm that reassures everyone else. Speaking up means disrupting the illusion. It means being the source of discomfort in a place that prides itself on being comfortable. The pressure to stay quiet can be overwhelming, especially when the surroundings keep telling you that nothing bad happens here. So maybe what you're experiencing isn't real or important enough. Meanwhile, those who rely on intimidation read the room well. They know where they are. They know the odds are in their favor because no one wants to believe something ugly could exist in such a neat setting. They mistake courtesy for weakness and silence for consent. They assume that the neighborhood itself will protect them. But quiet doesn't equal harmless. Calm doesn't equal safe. A lack of visible chaos doesn't mean there's no threat, only that it hasn't spilled out yet. The most unsettling moments often happen where people least expect them, precisely because expectation shapes attention. When everyone is focused on maintaining appearances, reality has room to move unnoticed. The danger isn't just the individuals who cause harm. It's the collective decision to look away, to stay comfortable, to trust the image instead of the signals that something isn't right. Quiet neighborhoods don't erase human behavior. They just lower the volume until someone is forced to hear it. Power is often loud in the minds of the people who think they have it. They mistake confidence for control and volume for authority. When someone believes they're in charge, they stop checking their assumptions. They stop reading the room. They stop asking the most important question, which is whether their power actually exists or if it's just going unchallenged. Assumed power usually comes from context, not capability. A group feels strong because they outnumber someone. A voice feels dominant because it's aggressive. A threat feels real because it's delivered without hesitation. None of that guarantees strength. It just creates the appearance of it. People who rely on intimidation depend on others believing the act, because the moment that belief breaks, everything they're standing on collapses. Misjudgment happens when someone confuses fear with respect. Fear can be temporary and situational. Respect is earned and stable. When someone sees fear in another person's reaction, they often assume they've secured obedience. What they fail to recognize is that fear doesn't erase options. It just delays them. The calculation is happening quietly, even when nothing is said out loud. There's also a tendency to underestimate the unknown. People assess threats based on what they can see: size, posture, tone, numbers. What they don't see is training, experience, or the ability to act decisively under pressure. They assume that if someone looks calm or stays silent, they're weak. In reality, calm is often the sign of someone who knows exactly what they can do and is choosing when to do it. Power misjudgment is rooted in arrogance. It's the belief that the situation is already decided, that the other person has no leverage, that nothing unexpected will happen. Arrogance narrows awareness. It keeps people locked into a single version of reality where they are always on top. That's why the fall is so sudden when it comes. There's no preparation for resistance because resistance was never considered. Groups are especially prone to this error. Collective confidence amplifies bad judgment. Each person feeds off the others, reinforcing the idea that they're untouchable. Responsibility feels diluted and risk feels shared. In those moments, no one is thinking clearly. They're reacting to each other more than the situation itself, mistaking momentum for control. True power is quiet and selective. It doesn't need to announce itself because it's not dependent on permission. It waits. It observes. It understands timing. People who actually hold power don't rush to prove it. They let others reveal their weaknesses first. That patience is often mistaken for hesitation by those who don't know the difference. When power is misjudged, consequences arrive fast. There's no gradual correction, no warning phase. The shift is immediate and overwhelming because the balance was never as stable as it looked. What seemed like dominance turns into exposure. What felt like control becomes vulnerability. The same confidence that fueled the mistake prevents a quick recovery. This kind of miscalculation doesn't just affect the person making it. It ripples outward. Witnesses reassess what they thought they understood about strength, about safety, about who is actually in charge. The illusion breaks, and once it's broken, it doesn't easily come back. People start questioning other assumptions they've been carrying without proof. Power that's real doesn't need allies who are afraid. It doesn't rely on silence from bystanders. It doesn't collapse when challenged. Assumed power does. It only exists as long as everyone agrees to treat it as real. The moment someone refuses, the structure shows its cracks. Those who misjudge power often learn too late that dominance isn't about how loud you speak or how many people stand beside you. It's about capability, awareness, and the willingness to act when necessary. When those elements are misread, the outcome is never subtle and never negotiable. Silence is often misunderstood because people are conditioned to associate strength with noise. Loud voices, bold gestures, public declarations. When someone doesn't react immediately, doesn't argue, doesn't push back in obvious ways, it's easy to assume they lack power or resolve. That assumption is convenient, but it's rarely accurate. Silence is not absence. It's presence held in reserve. Many people stay quiet because they are processing, not because they are afraid. They are observing patterns, weighing risks, and deciding on timing. Silence gives them space to understand the situation without revealing their own position. In moments of tension, speaking too soon can be a mistake. It exposes intention, emotion, and limits. Staying quiet keeps options open. Those who rely on intimidation often misread this. They expect resistance to look a certain way. Raised voices, physical posturing, verbal defiance. When they don't get that, they assume compliance. They think the quiet person has already surrendered internally. What they don't see is that restraint can be deliberate and strategic, not submissive. Silence can also be learned behavior. Some people have lived long enough to know that reacting publicly doesn't always lead to the best outcome. They've seen how escalation works, how words can make situations worse instead of better. So they choose control over expression. That choice can look passive from the outside, but internally it's active and intentional. There's also emotional discipline involved. Staying quiet when provoked requires effort. It means resisting the urge to defend your ego or prove something to others. That restraint takes strength, especially in situations where emotions are running high. Weakness would be reacting impulsively and losing control. Silence, in that context, is a form of command over oneself. In threatening situations, silence can serve as protection. Speaking draws attention. It can give away fear, uncertainty, or intent. Remaining quiet allows someone to remain unreadable. When others can't predict your next move, they often overestimate their own safety and underestimate your capability. That imbalance can shift the entire dynamic. People who mistake silence for weakness often reveal more than they realize. They grow careless. They say too much. They push boundaries further than they should. Their confidence increases as they believe there's no resistance coming. In reality, they're providing information and creating openings they don't know exist. Silence invites exposure from those who feel unchallenged. There's a difference between being silenced and choosing silence. Being silenced is imposed and disempowering. Choosing silence is agency. It's deciding when and how to engage. That distinction matters, but it's invisible to anyone only looking for outward signs of strength. From the outside, both can look the same, which is why misjudgments happen. Silence is also a survival skill. In unpredictable environments, drawing attention can increase danger. Many people learn early on that staying quiet keeps them safer, gives them time, and allows them to wait for the right moment to act. That habit doesn't disappear just because the setting looks calm or controlled. It stays embedded, ready to be used when needed. When silence finally breaks, it often surprises those who assumed weakness. The response isn't gradual or tentative. It's decisive because it's been considered. The quiet person isn't reacting in the moment. They're executing a decision made earlier. That's why the shift feels sudden. What looked like inaction was preparation. Observers often rewrite the story afterward. They say the quiet person snapped or changed unexpectedly. In reality, nothing changed. The only difference is that action replaced observation. The strength was always there, just unseen. Silence had masked it long enough for others to forget it was a possibility. Silence doesn't seek validation. It doesn't need to announce intent or demand recognition. It exists independently of how others interpret it. That independence is exactly what makes it dangerous to underestimate. People who are comfortable staying quiet are usually comfortable acting alone, without applause or permission when the moment requires it. Assuming silence equals weakness is a mistake rooted in shallow thinking. It relies on surface-level cues and ignores internal factors like discipline, experience, and intent. Those who make that assumption often do so because they equate power with performance. When the performance isn't there, they assume the power isn't either, and they step closer than they should. Predatory behavior doesn't exist in isolation. It depends on an environment that allows it to continue. One of the most important elements of that environment is the presence of witnesses who choose not to act. Not because they agree with what's happening, but because inaction feels safer, easier, and less risky than involvement. Predators understand this dynamic better than anyone else. They don't just target individuals. They assess surroundings. They look for places where people mind their own business, avoid conflict, and prioritize comfort over confrontation. A crowded area doesn't automatically mean safety. If everyone is trained to look away, numbers don't matter. What matters is whether anyone is willing to break the silence. Witnesses often tell themselves stories to justify doing nothing. It might not be what it looks like. Someone else will step in. I don't have all the information. I don't want to make things worse. These thoughts don't come from cruelty. They come from fear and uncertainty. Predators count on that hesitation. They rely on the gap between noticing something is wrong and deciding to act. Social norms play a huge role. People are taught from a young age not to interfere, not to accuse, not to overreact. Causing a scene is seen as worse than allowing harm to continue quietly. In many settings, the biggest social violation isn't the harmful behavior itself, but the disruption that comes from calling it out. Predators use that imbalance to their advantage. There's also diffusion of responsibility. When multiple people are present, each person feels less accountable. Everyone assumes someone else is better positioned to help, more confident, more informed, more authorized. That assumption spreads until no one moves. From the outside, it looks like indifference. From the inside, it feels like paralysis. Predators test boundaries early. Small actions, subtle comments, minor invasions of space. They watch reactions closely. If no one responds, they escalate. Silence is interpreted as permission, even if it's rooted in discomfort rather than consent. Every moment of inaction teaches them how far they can go without consequences. Witnesses also underestimate their influence. They assume intervention requires physical force or dramatic confrontation. In reality, presence alone can disrupt predatory behavior. A direct question, a calm interruption, eye contact that says someone is paying attention. Predators prefer control and secrecy. When that control is threatened, even slightly, the risk calculation changes. Fear of retaliation keeps many people frozen. They worry about becoming the next target, about social backlash, about being wrong. Those fears are real, but predators amplify them through confidence and intimidation. They project certainty to make others doubt themselves. The more unchecked they are, the more convincing that projection becomes. In environments where no one intervenes, victims notice. They register who is looking away, who is pretending not to see. That awareness deepens isolation. It reinforces the feeling that speaking up is pointless because no one will support them. Silence from witnesses doesn't just protect the predator. It compounds the harm by stripping away hope. Over time, inaction becomes normalized. People adjust their expectations. They learn what's tolerated and what isn't worth addressing. The bar for intervention rises higher and higher until only extreme situations provoke a response. By then, the damage is already done. Predators thrive in that gradual erosion of standards. Witnesses often believe neutrality is harmless, that by staying out of it, they're not taking sides. In reality, inaction always favors the person with more power in the moment. Doing nothing isn't neutral. It's a choice that shapes the outcome, even if it doesn't feel like one. Breaking this pattern doesn't require heroics. It requires awareness and willingness. The willingness to be uncomfortable, to risk social friction, to acknowledge that safety isn't maintained by silence, but by accountability. Predators lose power the moment they realize they're being watched by people who won't look away. Intimidation works best on uncertainty. It relies on fear filling in the gaps where knowledge should be. When someone doesn't know what to do, how to react, or what their options are, intimidation feels powerful. It creates the illusion that the person applying pressure is in control. Training dismantles that illusion because it replaces uncertainty with familiarity. Training isn't just about physical ability. It's about repetition under stress. It's about knowing how your body responds when adrenaline hits, when your heart rate spikes, when fine motor skills start to disappear. Someone who has trained has already experienced discomfort in controlled environments. They've been pushed, corrected, and pushed again until pressure becomes manageable instead of overwhelming. Intimidation depends on unpredictability. Raised voices, sudden movements, aggressive posturing. These tactics are designed to disrupt thinking and provoke panic. Training does the opposite. It creates patterns. When a situation starts to resemble something you've practiced, your mind narrows its focus instead of spinning out. You're not guessing anymore. You're recognizing. People who rely on intimidation often mistake fear responses for weakness. They assume that if they can make someone flinch or freeze, they've won. What they don't realize is that trained individuals expect those reactions. They've studied them. They've learned how to work through them. Fear doesn't disappear with training, but it becomes information instead of a barrier. There's also a difference in posture that intimidation can't fake. Training builds a kind of quiet confidence that doesn't need to be announced. Movements are efficient. Reactions are measured. There's no wasted energy trying to look tough. That calmness can be unsettling to someone who is trying to dominate through chaos because it doesn't respond the way they expect. Intimidation is loud because it needs to be. It has to convince everyone in the moment, including the person using it, that it's effective. Training is quiet because it doesn't need approval. It functions whether anyone is watching or not. The person who is trained knows their limits and their capabilities. That knowledge reduces the need to bluff. Another advantage of training is decision-making. Under pressure, untrained people tend to hesitate or overreact. They either do nothing or do too much. Training creates a middle ground. It teaches when to act and when not to. That discernment is critical because it prevents escalation while still maintaining control. Those who intimidate often overcommit. They push too far because they believe the other person has no response. Training exploits that overcommitment. It recognizes openings created by aggression. Intimidation narrows vision. Training widens it. The more aggressive someone becomes, the more predictable they often are to someone who knows what to look for. Training also builds resilience. Not just physical toughness, but mental endurance. Being yelled at, pressured, or threatened doesn't feel novel when you've already been exposed to stress in training environments. It doesn't mean the situation isn't serious. It means your nervous system isn't experiencing it for the first time. There's a reason intimidation tends to fail against people with experience. Experience teaches that not every threat is real and not every loud person is dangerous. It also teaches that action doesn't have to match volume. A small, precise response can be far more effective than a dramatic one. People who rely on intimidation often collapse when it doesn't work. Their confidence is built on immediate compliance. When that compliance doesn't come, frustration replaces control. Mistakes follow. Training prepares for that moment. It anticipates emotional spikes in others and stays grounded when they happen. This doesn't mean trained individuals are eager for confrontation. In many cases, training makes people more cautious, not more aggressive. They understand consequences. They know how quickly situations can spiral. That awareness makes their restraint intentional, not hesitant. The real imbalance between training and intimidation is time. Training takes time, effort, and humility. Intimidation is quick and superficial. One builds depth. The other relies on surface reactions. When those two meet, depth almost always outlasts noise. Intimidation needs an audience and a reaction. Training only needs a situation. One collapses when exposed. The other activates. That difference is why intimidation feels powerful right up until it stops working, and why training doesn't look impressive until the exact moment it matters. Most environments don't change because of speeches or policies. They change because of moments. A single action that disrupts the pattern everyone has grown used to. Before that moment, behavior follows momentum. People act the way they've always acted because nothing has forced them to reconsider. One intervention is often enough to break that momentum and expose how fragile it really was. In places where harmful behavior has gone unchecked, everyone has adapted in small ways. People learn where not to stand, when not to look, which conversations to avoid. These adjustments become routine. Over time, they stop feeling like compromises and start feeling normal. The environment reshapes itself around the problem instead of confronting it. An intervention interrupts that adaptation. It introduces friction where there was smooth avoidance. Suddenly, the old rules don't apply. The assumptions people were relying on no longer feel safe. Even those who weren't directly involved feel the shift. They realize that the situation they thought was stable can change quickly when someone decides not to play along. The power of intervention isn't just in stopping a single act. It's in what it signals to everyone watching. It tells victims they're not invisible. It tells bystanders they have options. It tells offenders that the margin they were operating within is gone. That message travels faster than any formal announcement ever could. What's striking is how often one action is enough. Not because it solves everything, but because it reintroduces uncertainty for those who relied on predictability. When harmful behavior goes unchallenged, it becomes efficient. People know what they can get away with and how. An intervention makes that knowledge unreliable. Suddenly, there's risk where there was confidence. Observers tend to reassess themselves after a moment like that. They replay their own past inaction. They think about what they might do differently next time. Even if they never say it out loud, the internal shift matters. The environment becomes less passive because people are no longer sure silence is the safest option. For the person who intervenes, the moment often isn't dramatic in their own mind. It's a decision made quickly, sometimes instinctively. They act because something crosses a line they can't ignore. They don't know how far the ripple will go. They're focused on the immediate situation, not the broader consequences. But the broader consequences come anyway. Conversations change. People reference the moment indirectly. Behavior adjusts. The unspoken rules get rewritten. What once felt tolerated now feels risky. That change doesn't require constant reinforcement. It embeds itself into how people perceive the space. Those who benefited from the old pattern feel the shift most sharply. They become cautious. They test less. They watch more. The freedom they thought they had shrinks because it's no longer protected by collective silence. Even if no one confronts them again, the memory of being challenged lingers. Intervention also redefines responsibility. It breaks the illusion that no one can do anything. Once someone has acted, the excuse of helplessness loses credibility. Future inaction feels more like a choice than an inevitability. That awareness alone can prevent harm before it starts. There's often a belief that meaningful change requires authority or numbers. In reality, it often requires presence and timing. Being there when it matters. Acting before the situation fully settles into its familiar shape. Early intervention is disruptive because it denies harmful behavior the chance to solidify. The environment after an intervention is rarely perfect. Tension can increase. People may argue about what happened. Some may resist the change. But even resistance is a sign that the space is no longer numb. Engagement, even uncomfortable engagement, means the pattern has been interrupted. What lingers most is the knowledge that the block, the group, the room is not as passive as it once seemed. That knowledge changes how people move through it. It alters calculations on all sides. Safety becomes less about appearances and more about accountability, because someone has demonstrated that action is possible. One intervention doesn't just stop a moment. It creates a reference point, a before and after. Everything that follows is measured against it, even if no one openly acknowledges that fact. The memory stays embedded in the environment, shaping behavior long after the immediate situation has passed.